الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Dear sisters and brothers in Islam and Iman, Salamun Alaikum. As last week, we'll be starting with a brief quiz. This will give you an idea of, what we are doing is whether it's adding to your knowledge or not, or you already know all these things, you're graduated, then, so the questions are there. I'll give you about 3-4 minutes to go through it. Write your right, select the right response, and then we'll go back to it at the end of the lecture. Last week we looked at the introduction of the discussion about Sharia, its meaning and its importance and status in Islam. And then we looked at the 3 methods by which a person can follow the Sharia. One is Ijtihad, the other is Taqleed, and the third is Ehtiyat. And we had mentioned that this is based on dalil aqli, rational basis for it. And then we went into Ijtihad to understand the meaning of it and the need for Ijtihad, why it is required, and how the meaning of the term changed from the Sunni fuqaha to the Shia fuqaha in the 7th century, and how it's used in a different meaning. And there we have discussed that Ijtihad basically is not a source of law, of the Sharia law. It is actually the method or the process by which the Sharia law is derived. And that is the meaning of the word Ijtihad. And basically, when we look at the process of deriving the Sharia laws from its proper sources, this exercise of Ijtihad is based on 2 important sciences in Islam. The 2 important ulum in Islam, and that is what we are going to look at it tonight, just to be more familiar with how the mujtahideen go about deriving the laws from their proper sources. The 2 sciences which are the foundation of Ijtihad basically are known as Usul al-Fiqh and Fiqh. The translation would be the principles of jurisprudence, and the other is known as fiqh, jurisprudence by itself. And the importance of understanding that is that in Usul al-Fiqh, this is the science or the subject where the method of deriving the Sharia law is devised. And the mujtahid has to first sit down and come up with the method. What are the sources? What are acceptable? What are not acceptable? What is the method I'm going to use in order to derive the laws from these sources that I identify to be reliable sources? So all this has to be discussed first by a mujtahid in Usul al-Fiqh. Once he has come up with a system of ijtihad, that's where then he actually does ijtihad, and that's where we come to fiqh. So usul al-fiqh is the method of ijtihad, and fiqh itself is the practice or the method of deriving the laws from the sources. If I may put it in different words, I can say usul al-fiqh is the theory of ijtihad, whereas fiqh is the practice of ijtihad. So in usul al-fiqh, the mujtahid has to first come up with a system that when I have a mas'ala, where do I go? Number one, if I don't find it in the first source, what is the second source that I'll see? If I don't see it in the second source, what do I do with it? So all these things have to first be settled by the mujtahid in usul al-fiqh before he goes into the practice of ijtihad in fiqh. Of course, when we talk about this process, Arabic language is a prerequisite. A person does not have to be an expert of language and a poet and this and that, no. But the basics of Arabic language is absolutely essential, because the primary sources that we have, the Quran and the Hadith, are all in Arabic. So you can't say, okay, we have all the translation of the Hadith books, we have translation of the Quran, so I'm going to sit down there and do Ijtihad. That's not Sharia. That will not make you reach to the point of that Hawz Kausar at the end. No, so the language of the Quran and Hadith is very essential. So let us look at Usul al-Fiqh today and see if we can cover this in the session tonight. Usul al-Fiqh. The very first discussion is about the status of the sources that a mujtahid will find out. And there is a discussion among the mujtahideen where they start by this issue of Hujjatul of qat. The word al-qat and the word al-yaqeen and conviction are one and the same. So the first thing that they have to agree on, that okay, we can't just go on the hadith and the Quran. First we need to have a basis which will be acceptable on our aqli basis, and that is that whatever method that we devise, it must be a convincing, we must have conviction in that source. If it doesn't have qat and yaqeen, it is not hujjat. So the first issue they discuss is the issue of hujjat of qat. And this is almost given. You don't really need to go into a lot of discussions about it, because if you don't have yaqeen on something, you cannot really use that. Now this issue of qat, the binding authority of conviction, this leads a mujtahid that okay, when he reaches to the sources, he might end up with two kinds of sources. There might be a source which has this yaqeen in it, that okay, this is, I have yaqeen when I get something from it. But sometimes he might even end up with a source which doesn't have, there is no yaqeen in there. There is dhann. Dhann means, you see, you have ignorance on one hand, which is 0%. Yaqeen is other hand, which is 100%. Shak is in between, 50-50. You don't know it's this way or that way. And between that 50 and 100 is something known as dhann, guman, khayal. I assume it is this way. And so mujtahid can come up with the methods of Sharia laws, and some would be qat'i, yaqini. There is conviction in that, and that is hujjat. That is a binding authority, he has to follow it. The others are known as dhanni, and that will not be acceptable source for deriving Islamic laws. Now, let me just give an example. Dalil qat'i. or a source which is qat'i is the Quran, for example. We know Quran is, as a Muslim, a mujtahid is somebody who's already into the faith. He's not an outsider. So he believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he believes in the Prophet, he believes in the Quran, he believes in the Imams. He knows that, okay, Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has yaqeen about it, and so it's hujjat on him. And when he looks at the hadith mutawatir, I purposely added the word mutawatir. A hadith which is coming from the ma'soom, which is beyond any doubt as far as reliability and authenticity is concerned. That also for a mujtahid is qat and yaqeen, as a source of law. But then there will be other sources, which we will call it dalil dhanni, non-convincing proof. That's the simple way of putting it. Okay, now, what happens at that time? When it comes to a qat'i source or a qat'i dalil for Islamic laws, for deriving it, that is absolutely is hujjat. It is a binding authority on him to follow that. But when it comes to dalil dhanni, I didn't put a cross there. What I put there is a question mark. And why I have done that? Because when it comes to any source or a proof for Islamic laws, which is not qat'i, rather it is dhanni, there it has no validity. It is no hujjiyat for us, unless the Sharia allows us to follow it. And that is why we have this question mark. If you look at the PowerPoint there, it says, however, a mujtahid can rely on a dalil dhanni or a dhanni proof or source only if the Sharia itself approves its use for this purpose. I know I'm confusing you quite a lot, but we'll come to an example. This will make things easier. Let us look at a hadith known as khabar wahid. What does khabar mean? Not the BBC News or CBC. Khabar here means hadith. And so when we look at the word khabar there, the second question there in the quiz, it's referring to hadith. Al-akhbar, al-hadith, al-khabar. So there is one kind of hadith which is known as khabar wahid, where the narrator is only one single individual. Now, if you have a hadith which is narrated by one single individual, does that create yaqeen in our mind and heart? Is it qat'i yaqeeni or it is dhanni? What do you think about it? If one person only is coming and saying, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم this and that, وقال الصادق عليه السلام, then that hadith will be known as khabar wahid. This is opposite of what I had mentioned earlier, hadith mutawatir. Means because of that tawatur, there were so many narrators, it creates yaqeen and qat in our mind. But if it is khabar wahid, it doesn't really create that yaqeen. And so, because it does not create that conviction, it doesn't have hujjiyat. It is not a binding, it doesn't have a binding authority. And so, why? Because even if that one individual is a good person, but there is a possibility he might be a forgetful person, he might have misunderstood what he heard, or maybe when he was quoting, not intentionally but unintentionally, he misquoted the Prophet or the Imam. These are very possible things. So you have a good person, a single person giving this report, and this happens to us. Many times I get things back to me. Maulana, you said this. I said, no, I didn't say that. And the person who is reported here to have said that didn't say that out of any purpose. No, he probably didn't understand what I was saying. or didn't get the whole picture of what I was saying. So it's very possible that the narrator might be a good person, a reliable person, but because of this, maybe he didn't have a sharp memory, or he didn't understand properly, or when he quoted the statement, it was not quoted fully or completely. And so these problems are there in khabar wahid, and therefore it does not create yaqeen and qat and conviction in the mind of the mujtahid. So it is not a dhanni, that probably this is true. But as soon as the assumption comes in, the hujjiyat is gone down. And this is where we see that, however, if such a khabar wahid comes for a reliable person, then a mujtahid can use it. Why? Because the Sharia itself has approved such source for us. Now, let me give you an example, and this is an exercise for all of you. I'll give you 2 minutes for you to see if you can look at this ayat and come up with the basis of accepting khabar wahid of a reliable person. Look at this ayat. It says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنْ جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. O you who believe, if a sinful person comes to you with a news, فَتَبَيَّنُوا, then do tabayyun, investigate. أَن تُصِيبَ قَوْمًا بِجَهَالَةٍ, so that you do not harm a people because of ignorance. فَتُصْبِحُوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلْتُمْ نَادِمِينَ, then you will become remorseful, regretful on what you had done. Our mujtahideen use this ayat to prove that although khabar wahid by itself is dhanni, doesn't create conviction, but the Sharia itself, the Quran itself, for example, has allowed us to use khabar wahid of a reliable person. Now, how do you derive that from this ayat? Anybody wants to have a try? In means if. And at the end of that line you have tabayyanu. The order is do investigation. So there is fa before it. The word in and the fa, that is the secret there. If a fasiq comes to you, then do the investigation. Let's look at this way. If a sinful person comes to you, in is a conditional clause, and fa there then is the result of it. But that is dependent on if. And so the mantuq of ayat, mantuq means the apparent meaning of this ayat is that if a sinful person comes, then investigate before you take that report. What will be the mafhum of the ayat? Mantuq means the apparent meaning. Mafhum means the implied meaning. The implied meaning is that if a righteous person, not a fasiq, if he comes, then you don't have to do tabayyun. You don't have to do the investigation. So the mafhum of the ayat, not the mantuq. Mantuq is talking about a fasiq. The implied meaning of the ayat, which is the mafhum, is saying that if that person is adil, instead of fasiq, a righteous person, then you will take his words. There is no need to do tabayyun. Based on this is just one example. The mujtahideen come to this conclusion that, okay, we will take a hadith which is khabar wahid, provided it is a khabar wahid of a adil reporter. Is this clear? Or should I repeat this again? The difference between, suppose if I have not gone to Mecca, never seen pictures, no movies, I lived 200 years ago, and somebody comes, whom I know is a fasiq, but he is a haji. You can have a haji who's fasiq also, isn't it? At least he can still go to a hajj and come back with the title. And he comes, and says, I saw the Kaaba is this way or that way. I will say, okay, but there will be no yaqeen in my heart about him, because I know he either exaggerates or even makes up, lies. But then, somebody comes who is truthful person. I know he is a very righteous person. He comes and gives me this same report. I will accept it. And if you have, let's say, the example of hadith mutawatir. Suppose I have 15 people coming from Hajj. 7 of them are fasiq, 7 of them are adil. But now, because we have 15 person narrating the same thing, then I don't look at the individual narrators. I take the entire report collectively and consider it to be mutawatir, because that creates conviction in my mind. And that becomes hujjat for me. And so this is one way that when it comes to in Usul al-Fiqh, when they look at Quran and then the hadith and then they look at hadith mutawatir, and they say, okay, any mutawatir hadith, I will use it for deriving shari'i laws. But khabar wahid, I will not, unless it is from an adil, trustworthy person. Although it is a dhanni, it's not a qat'i, dalil and source. Another example of the negative side. This was the positive. You know about qiyas. Qiyas means analogy. Qiyas basically means that you see the Sharia says, and it's 100% you have yaqeen. Sharia is saying, let's say wine is haram. And the source is very clear. It is saying wine, this is haram. And I look at it, and then I look at beer. But I don't see any ayat or hadith on beer. It's just a hypothetical example. So then I say, okay, wine, it has this quality of intoxication. Beer also has the quality of intoxication. So then I take the hukum of wine, which is based on a shar'i dalil, and then transport that to beer. Although there was no ayat or hadith about it. This is known as qiyas. Means you take one hukum of one thing, then you look at something else which is similar to it, and then you extend that hukum from A to B. This is known as qiyas or analogy. Now, this is not qat'i. We consider it to be dhanni because, it doesn't convince us 100%. And the reason why we say that is because I don't know why wine was made haram. The ayat or the hadith didn't say because it is intoxicant. Because it didn't explain the reason for hurmat, I cannot extend it from A to B. If it had given me the reason why this is haram, then yes, because of that clear reasoning behind that dalil, I could have extended it. But without the reasoning, if I extend it, it is called qiyas, which is dalil dhanni, and it is not acceptable. You look at in history, Abu Hanifa, the founder of the Hanafi fiqh. He is the one who is known as the major proponent of qiyas. He really was kind of allergic to hadith. He didn't use hadith that much. And he was just use his qiyas, to come up with things. And the Shia fiqh is completely against it on this issue. They say you can only take a hukum from A to B if the source itself, the Quran and Hadith, have explained why this is haram. And if their explanation exists in B, then you can extend, otherwise you cannot. And so, You know this famous conversation between Imam Jaffar as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam and Abu Hanifa on this issue. Imam was very clear about it. And this is where he says to him that the first person who had done qiyas was Iblis. And if you remember, his qiyas was from the Quran, where he says, Ana khayrun minhu. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the malaika, and he was also there, although he was not a malak, he was a jinn. And when they were ordered to do sajda to Adam, he refused. And he uses this argument, which is a pure, aqli qiyas here. He says, Ana khayrun minhu. I am better than Adam. Why? Khalaqtani min nar wa khalaqtahu min teen. You created me from fire. You created him from earth, from dust. And fire is more powerful and important than earth. And therefore I am better. And if there is any sajda to be done, he should do it to me and not me to him. Now the problem here is that, Shaitan's analogy for the order of sajda was wrong. He didn't realize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give the order of sajda because Adam was created from turab. This is where he just took it to himself to explain that. No, it was not an issue of teen and nar. The order of sajda is very clear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ. When I have physically, assembled him or made him, so his body is already complete. That's not where the sajda order is coming. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. When I breathe in him the ruh. فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. Then you do sajda. So the order is to the ruh of Adam, not to the badan and the body of Adam, which is from teen. And this is where we see, Shaitan did a wrong qiyas here. And that is why when it comes to the Shari'i issues, when you look at qiyas, this is one of those dalil dhanni which is rejected in Shia fiqh. So you have khabar wahid, which is a dalil dhanni, but is accepted based on Quran and Sunnah. And qiyas is also a dalil dhanni, but it is rejected because we don't have any approval in our sources about it. Let us go to the other dimension of our discussion here, and that is about the kind of, or the categories of the sources for Sharia. We divide them into two. One is called dalil shar'i and the other is known as dalil aqli. Legal proof and rational proof. It doesn't mean qiyas. We'll come to that later on. Tonight we'll just look at the legal, the dalil shar'i. What kind of sources that our mujtahideen use to reach to a conclusion on any issue. Now dalil shar'i itself is divided into two. Oral source and non-oral source. Oral source is basically the Quran and the Hadith. These are the words. But then there are two other sources for deriving the laws, and which is a Shari'i basis. One is the Ma'soom's action. Whatever they do itself becomes a source of laws for us, because their action is considered to be always the truth and haqq. And not only that, the taqreer of the ma'soom, which means the silent approval of the ma'soom. Means if the ma'soom was there and something was done, and he was in a position to say, don't do it, and he doesn't do it, doesn't say anything, his silence itself is a dalil for us that this action is valid and okay. If you look at the example of, let us say, Bibi Fatima salawatullah alayha going to the Masjid al-Nabi, giving a speech in order to, express her, demands about the haqq and the right which was taken away from her. Or you look at Bibi Zainab giving this khutbah in public in Kufa. The question comes up, can a woman give a talk on a serious issue in public or not? Even if we don't have any hadith about it, the silence of Amir al-Mu'mineen there, allowing Fatima to go there and give her speech. Imam Zainul Abidin's, reaction, not saying don't say anything here, they are all non-mahram here. This itself is taqreer of the ma'soom. Means they could have prevented it, but they did not. And when they didn't do it, that itself becomes a basis of forming a Shari'i law. But of course you have to first make sure that it was a situation which was not of taqiyya, where Imam was in a position to speak and still did not speak. Now, the point here, although we have, technically we say oral and non-oral, but when it comes to the actions of the Masoom, or the silent approval of the Masoom, how does that reach to us 1400 years after that? It still comes in reports by others. And so although we divide it, lafzi wa ghayr lafzi, oral and non-oral, but in both cases you deal with words, either directly from the Quran or from the Ma'soom, or reports about their actions and their taqreer and silent approval. So you deal with words, and that is where language becomes very important. One of the things that mujtahideen have to first of all work out before even they go into ijtihad is to, for example, the whole discussion. When you look at Quran and Hadith, do you take the literal meaning of the things or not? Are there hujjat for us or not? This is where we have the problems with the akhbari perspective. They say even if the ayat is very clear, if there is no hadith of the Imam, you're not allowed to think about it or make any judgment about it. You basically have to suspend study of the Quran unless there is a hadith about that ayat from the Ma'soom. And this is one of the points of contention between akhbariyun and usuliyun. So it's not, if you remember last week I said, it's not that they are against the process of ijtihad, but there are certain points within the ijtihad where you have two different outlooks about it. One is this issue, hujjiyat of zuhur, that when we have words there, the way that they have come in the language, do we take it the way it is or not? And when it comes to the Sharia laws, this is the basis. Otherwise, we get this kind of Sufi mythical twist to every ayat. Or salat means meditation. No, we look at how the word salat was understood during the days of the Prophet. Although the literal meaning of the word salat is dua, means this word was not invented by Islam. The word salat existed even before Islam. But it was in the meaning of dua. But later on when Quran says aqimus salat, we look at the way it was understood and used by the Muslims of the early days. And that means a specific action where you stand up, qiyam, ruku and sujood. And so the issue of, literal meaning or not, this is one of the main issues which comes in. Then the relevant to that is the issue whether is there any room for metaphorical meaning in legal proofs. Can we use majazi terms? Very rarely will you see that Quran and Sunnah when it comes to fiqhi issues, not aqidah. Quran uses the word yadullah for, power of Allah. That's a majazi, that's a metaphorical meaning. But when it comes to orders that Allah is giving to us to do this or not to do that, or when Imams talk about it, they talk in very clear language, very precise meaning, not in a symbolic sense. Then the issue comes up, in Arabic language, the words are there in imperative form. Aqimu, the word aqimu is an imperative form. It's the command to establish the prayers, for example, to do the prayers. Does it mean that whenever the words are used in the Quran and Hadith in the imperative form, is it to be taken as wajib? Or can we also take it in the meaning of sunnat? And they're all details process. I'm just giving you, a flavor of what kind of discussions come up when it comes to the language of Quran and Hadith in Usul al-Fiqh. Then there's a discussion about some of the statements are very general, and this comes many times. Quran gives us general guidelines. Masumin come and put conditional statements about those ayat. And so how do you look at the general statement and then the conditional statements that we hear from other valid sources? The difference between a nas and a mujmal. Nas means a word which has only one meaning. And so there is no possibility of not understanding it. Maybe it means me in this or that. But sometimes a word might have been used which is mujmal. It could mean two different things, three different things. That is the language it is. And there the discussion comes up. What do we do? And that is where, when it comes to mujmal, we are forced to look at the context. For example, when you look at the statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Ghadir, when he says, "Man kuntu mawlahu fahadha aliyun mawla," the Sunni scholars, they play with this mujmal word, mawla. They say, oh, mawla means master as well as friend, as well as slave, all different meanings. And that is where they say, we have to be his friend. Well, that's where you have to look at the context. It is the context which will define the meaning of a mujmal term. So in case of Ghadir, the timing, the way he gives that khutbah, talks about his, death is approaching, and the way he then orders them to do, congratulate Ali. And even before that, the question that he asked them, "Alastu awla bikum min anfusikum?" Do not I have more authority on you than yourselves? So Mawla is in the meaning of awla. So you look at all this context, and that's where you say, okay, although the word is mujmal, but it is the context which helps us to understand the mujmal word. What does it mean? So let us do an exercise of that, mujmal and nas here. Look at this ayat that you implement every day. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. This is Surah Ma'idah, ayat number 6. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu idha qumtum ila salat. O you who believe, when you stand up for prayers, faqsilu wujuhakum wa aydiyakum. Wash your face and your hands. The problem is that the word aydikum, yad, is mujmal. It applies to palm and also the forearm as well as the entire hand. So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asking us to do? And this has been used in two different contexts, 2-3 different places. Or for example, the ayat which says, cut off their hands. Do you cut it here, or here, or here? So the word there is mujmal, and that's where you look at the context. The context is there, right in that ayat. Intentionally I made it blank there. Up to the elbows. Ila al-marafiq. The words ila al-marafiq are the qarina. It's the context to define how much of the hand is to be washed. So it's only this forearm part, up to the elbow. Now the Quran doesn't say you do it this way or this way. It's just saying Ila al-marafiq, these Muslims say you do it this way. It's not saying you wash this way. The words ila al-marafiq are there to limit the mujmal meaning of the word yad. Because if it was without ila al-marafiq, mashallah, Muslims would have a problem these days. Some of them would be doing from here to down, the way they wash the head already. Even so, the whole arm would have been washed. But ila al-marafiq puts the limit there. Then no, you have to wash only till the elbow. Now, whether you do it from elbow to the fingertips or the other way around, this is where you have to look at the sunnah of the Prophet. And the sunnah that we have, going all the way back to the Prophet, is that you start from here and end here. And so these words in Quran is only defining the meaning of the word aydiyakum. If it was left by itself, wujuhakum was clear. Aydiyakum was ambiguous there, whether it is this much or only this much. And so this is where we look at this language and how the words in the Quran and Hadith come as a context to define some of the mujmal words which are used as sources of the Sharia. Then one more issue which is important is the issue of authenticity of the sources that the mujtahideen use. Especially when we talk about the Shari'i sources. This is where two important sciences have emerged. One is known as ilm al-rijal. Literally it means the knowledge or the science about the people. And rijal here refers to the narrators of hadith. So ilm al-rijal is a science by itself. A mujtahid has to have an understanding about the narrators. Only then he will be able to decide whether this hadith is valid or not. And so they have to study the biography of the narrators and come up with a list for themselves. These are in the category of the Shia Adil narrators. Then you have a list of those who are fasiq. Then you have the list of those who are reliable but not Isna Ashari Shia. Then you have those who are neither reliable nor Isna Ashari. So you have all the different categories of narrators, and even if one of them are in one hadith, then the value and authenticity of hadith becomes of a different nature. And so this becomes a very important science that a mujtahid has to master. Another thing related to that is known as ilm al-hadith or dirayat al-hadith, which is about the hadith itself. They have to study the history of hadith, how was it basically preserved. When we talk about Usul al-Kafi was a work done in Ghaybat al-Sughra. That is actually exactly right in the Ghaybat al-Sughra, Sheikh Kulaini. And what he did was actually he put together 400 sources that he had from Shia narrators and the books which existed. And he basically compiled them, put them into subject-wise categories for later scholars to use that as the source. And so it's important for a mujtahid to be familiar with ilm al-rijal and ilm al-hadith also. For example, Ayatul Akhoy. Although we have the classical works were done soon after Ghaybat, Sheikh Tusi and others in the two generations during his time, there are 4 main reference books of Ilm al-Rijal. But others have come and done even more further research on it. For example, Ayatul Akhoy. He is known as one of the authorities of Ilm al-Rijal in this century. Although, again, for us, the Ijtihad doesn't stop with him. There are people who still go and dig more into these issues. So it's an ongoing process. And his research on Ilm al-Rijal itself, when it was published, it consisted of 22 volumes. And just to give you a visual, impact of that, Look at this, what I have in my library here. This is the 23 volume actually. The book of Ayatollah Khoyi known as Mu'jam Rijal al-Hadith, the encyclopedia of the narrators of Hadith. It's in a alphabetical order. So, if I want to know about any narrator, I would just go to the relevant section and look at it. And all the opinions about that individual, which was in the past, Ayatollah Khoyi has gathered it with his own analysis at the end and his view about that individual. And so, just to give an idea that, these things are not that easy. You just see one line in Tawzil Masail. But behind that one line is a lot of hard work. And this is just ilm al-rijal. The science dealing with the narrators of hadith. Now, going back to the sources of the Sharia, the legal sources, let me quickly mention 2 or 3 things. One is tawatur. If you remember, I mentioned the word hadith mutawatir. In hadith, if we have a hadith which is mutawatir, which means it's not khabar wahid. It is a hadith which has been narrated by multiple narrators. And all of them are saying the same thing, that they heard from the Prophet, this and that. And that number of narrators itself creates qat and yaqeen in the mind. And it becomes a solid source for deriving Sharia laws. For example, Hadith Ghadir is the best of the example for Hadith Mutawatir. We have actually about 120 Sahaba narrating the Hadith of Ghadir. There is not a single Hadith in the Muslim world where you had so many people narrating it. But the tragedy is that in 120,000 people, we have the names of only 120. So what is the ratio there? 120 out of 120,000. It's 1 out of 1,000. So that's a sad story. But still, number-wise, there is no any hadith in the Muslim world, Shia or Sunni, where the number of narrators of hadith has reached to that level. There is only one where it has 60 narrators. There is nothing beyond that. But this has 120 narrators. So this is one example of hadith mutawatir. Now it doesn't have to, there is no minimum number for tawatur. 10 narrators also would be sufficient, of different kinds. And when a hadith is classified as mutawatir, then it doesn't matter whether some of them are reliable, some are not. Some are fasiq, some of them are idle. Because the number itself, when you look at the theory of probability, it's most improbable that they would have sat down, conspired, that all of us will say this. And that's why, a tawatur by itself is one of the highest level of hadith. We talked about khabar wahid of a siqa, of a reliable person. The third source, which is not from Quran and hadith again, but it's linked to hadith, is known as siratun mutasharri'a. Mutasharri'a from Sharia. It means the general practice or attitude of the religious-minded companions of the Imams. For example, if we are able to establish in history that the ashab of the Imam all of them used to do this in this matter. And then you look at the literature of hadith that we have. There is not a single statement from the Ma'asum about it. When we look at the mutasharri' nature of these companions, that they were all religious-minded people. And if all of them are in a way doing the same thing, that itself becomes a window into hadith of the Ma'asum. Although we don't have the hadith by itself. It means that, these people must have been told something. which has not survived till our days. I'll give you an example of attending namaz Jummah of a Ghair Shia Imam. We don't believe it is wajib or even mustahab to do that. Now, even if we don't have a hadith about it, we know there are very clear indication. People like Zurara bin A'yun, his brother Abdul Malik bin Zurara bin A'yun, these are prominent Sahaba of the sixth Imam. They for a long, long time refrain from going to Namaz Jummah. By looking at their prominence and the status that they had and the way they were respected, by our Imams and the community at large, to believe that they were, by them not going to Namaz Jummah led by Ghair Imami Shi'i Imam, was a wrong thing to do. This would have been clearly denounced by the Imams. But we don't have anything like that, where they are being condemned for it. No. There are conversations between the Imam and them, but not in that sense. And so their action by itself, for us becomes a window that is just like silent approval of the Masoom. That, these were very prominent, companions. We don't have a hadith about it, but their action by itself becomes a way of understanding that this was acceptable from the perspective of the Imams. Finally, for tonight, we have Ijma'. We talked about Qiyas, Ijma'. Now, Ijma', normally it means consensus. And this is one of the independent source of law among Sunni fuqaha. They believe that the Ummah is united on one thing. That itself is equivalent to Quran and Hadith. They actually give it the same, value. From the Shi'i perspective, Ijma' is not acceptable in that way. It is not an independent source. We use that term from the Sunni Fiqh, but in a very different meaning. Ijma' which is acceptable by Shia Mujtahideen is Ijma' of the early scholars of the early days of Ghaibat Sughra and Kubra, going back to the time of the Imams. If all these Mujtahideen of the early days gave a fatwa on an issue, and they were unanimous on that, and then we look at the ahadith which existed, right in the books of the same scholars who even compiled ahadith, there is not a single hadith about it. For us, the ijma', the consensus of the early Shia scholars of those days, becomes a window into the hadith of the Imam. It is an indication that, there must have been something, a lafzi dalil, a statement from the Imam which have not survived in the books which have, come till our time. And so you have to realize we are not talking about consensus of the ulama of the present day or of the last 5 centuries. No, we are talking about the consensus of the ulama of the very early days. And therefore, we use the word ijma', but in a very different meaning from the way it is used by the Sunnis. You have a great scholar by the name of Sheikh Murtaza al-Ansari. And he is the main scholar of Usul al-Fiqh of the last 2 centuries. Most of the Mujtahideen are basically, in a way, disciples of his method of Usul al-Fiqh. He himself says that the origin of ijma' is from Ahl Sunnah, and Ahl Sunnah originates from the ijma'. Because they talk about ijma' of the Saqifa, which was really not even ijma'. If Ali was not there, how can you say it was the ijma' of the Ummah? Salman Farsi was not there. Abu Zar al-Ghafari was not there. So it's not really ijma', but this is the way that's how they use it. But we use it in a very different meaning. And even that, consensus of the early ulama by itself has no value. The only way that the mujtahideen accept it is when they say that, it becomes a way of, knowing that this must have been approved by the imam. They use the concept of lutf, for example, Sheikh Tusi. He says, if all the ulama of the early days you were unanimous in an issue, it is wajib on the imam of the time, in one way or another, to come and correct them. Because all of them are then going on the wrong path. If there is a source there to guide them, then imam doesn't have to say anything. He will just leave it to you. Go and do a little bit more hard work, and you will find the truth. But if everyone is unanimous on an issue, then according to that qaida, the principle of lutf that we believe in our aqidah, according to Sheikh Tusi, it becomes wajib for the imam to say something at that time. One of the brothers had asked about the example of it. We are running out of time. You take the issue of shaving of the beard. Don't take it seriously. For example, if you look at the discussions that Ayatollah Khoui has, he looks at the ahadith. Then there is no ayat which supports it in that very clear meaning. There are some people who try to use some of the ayat, but there is nothing convincing about it. There are some ahadith, there are actually 7 ahadith on this issue. Ayatollah Khoui, one or another, every hadith, he says, either there is a problem with the sanad of the hadith, so it's not reliable, or if the sanad is okay, then the meaning is not sufficient to prove that it's haram. Until he ends up with one hadith, where he says the sanad is okay, and the meaning is also clear, and therefore we give the fatwa. But then he says, and this is where, in Ijtihad, one of the training is that suppose there was no ayat about it. Suppose there was no hadith about it, then what do you do? That's where he says, if you look at the ijma of the ulama, from now going all the way to the days of the imams themselves. And then he uses another principle. He said, look at the seerah of mutasharri'ah, the religious-minded companions of the Prophet, of the imams. There you will see that this issue of, shaving of the beard was shunned, looked down, and that is where we see that, this conduct of the companions of the imam itself is a window into what the imams were thinking at that time. We'll conclude here. If we can just go quickly through the quiz there. Number 1, you know the answer now. It is C. Number 2, khabar means hadith. Number 3, fasiq. What is the opposite of that? Adil. The famous scholar who did qiyas, Abu Hanifa. Taqreer of the Masoom. This is not Urdu taqreer. It's not a speech, it means silent approval. Mujmal means ambiguous term. Ilm al-Rijal deals with the biography of narrators, and Mutawatir means a hadith narrated by many people, or you can say of the best of the category. Ijma is the ijma of the early scholars, and the concept of ijma among Shias is actually not a source of law, but a window into hadith. I think we have run out of time, but I'll give 2 minutes if you have any questions. Yes. Yes, Sirat al-Mutasharri'ah is about the companions of the Imams, whereas Ijma is of the early scholars of the Ghaybat al-Sughra and early Ghaybat al-Kubra era. Yes. Well, if there are many, we would assume at least you'll get one adil there. But even if you don't have it, just the number of the narrators itself would be sufficient. Well, you see, it all depends again on the. You might have a saying which is there from. You see, for us, a hadith is a hadith which is from the Ma'soom. And so when it comes to other sources, we don't really have that much of a. We would look at it if it is from the Shia sources or not, because even the ahadith, when you say Sahih, Muwassaq, Hasan, and Da'if, there are 4 categories of hadith. Sahih is where all the narrators are authentic, reliable, trustworthy people, just people, and all of them are Shia Isna Ashari. Muwassaq is that they might not be Adil, but they are still Shia Isna Ashari who are reliable. Then you have Hasan, where you have a narrator who is not Isna Ashari from other madhab, but a reliable person. We still call it Hasan. And then anything out of that would be all Za'if. We will not accept that unless it is supported by our own sources. Yes. Can you speak loud, please? Fasiq would be a general term, even we can use for a ghayr mu'min who is committing sins publicly. If you look at this ayat, it was applied to Walid bin Mughira. The same fellow where another ayat describes him again as fasiq. أَفَمَنْ كَانَ مُؤْمِنًا كَمَنْ كَانَ فَاسِقًا لَا يَسْتَوُونَ. There the mu'min is Amir al-Mu'minin Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam, and fasiq is the same fellow. So he's not a mu'min, but he is a fasiq. Basically, fasiq means anyone who publicly violates the Sharia laws. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.